So tell me, sweetheart, what's your rank? Or are you just here to polish our rifles? The laughter dies the second she pulls the trigger. 5 shots. 18 seconds. 800 meters. Every single one dead center. Admiral Victor Kane's smirk doesn't survive the silence that follows. Because the woman he just humiliated in front of his own officers isn't some walk-on, with a mop and a bad attitude. She's a ghost. Literally. Officially dead for 3 years, buried under a name nobody was ever supposed to say out loud again. And when her sleeve rides up, when the tattoo finally shows, the whole base is about to learn exactly why they don't mock a woman just because she doesn't wear her rank on her sleeve. She's not here to prove she can shoot. She's here because someone on this base already tried to kill her once. This time, she's not going to miss.
The desert doesn't ask permission before it takes something from you. Not the water in your canteen, not the shade off your shoulders, not your name, if you've learned to live without one. Have you ever watched someone get humiliated in front of a crowd and known, somewhere low in your gut, that the joke was about to turn on the people laughing? That's Fort Marlow at 2 in the afternoon. Heat pressing down like a hand on the back of your neck. 15 personnel running qualification drills on the outdoor range. Dust kicking up in slow spirals every time boots hit gravel. And off to the side, in the thin strip of shade thrown by the equipment shed, a woman sits cross-legged with a disassembled rifle laid out across a cloth like surgical instruments. 29 years old. No rank tabs, no name tape, just a uniform that's been washed so many times the colors gone soft, and hands that move over the bolt carrier group with a kind of patience most people lose by their second enlistment. Her name is Anna King. Nobody on this range knows that yet. Admiral Edward Harris crosses the firing line first, 6 officers trailing him like a current pulling debris. 58 years old, silver hair cut close. The kind of posture that comes from 3 decades of people snapping to attention when he walks into a room. He doesn't walk toward Anna so much as arrive there, the way weather arrives. "Look at what we've got polishing rifles today," he says, loud enough for the whole line to hear it. "You lost, or is this cleanup duty?" She doesn't look up, cloth still moving, small circles, steady. Lieutenant Ryan Robinson steps up beside him, 32, lean, the kind of handsome that comes with its own inflated sense of entitlement. "Probably doesn't speak English, sir." He says it like a joke he's already heard himself tell before. "Maybe just facilities. They let anyone clean up out here these days." A couple of the junior officers laugh. One of them, barely out of the academy, nudges his buddy. $10 says she can't even load it right. 20 says she's never fired anything bigger than a 9-mile. Because that's the thing about people who've spent their whole careers being underestimated. They stop waiting for the insult to land. They just let it pass through, like wind through a fence. Range Master Timothy Clark watches from near the control tower. 62 years old, spine still straight. Face like weathered stone that's seen every kind of shooter the military can produce, good and bad and dangerous. He's not laughing. He's watching her hands, the angle of her wrists, the rhythm of her breathing, slow, 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out. He's seen that pattern exactly twice before, in 15 years running this range. Both times in places he wasn't allowed to talk about afterward. Harris leans down now, voice dropping into that particular register senior officers use when they want to sound patient, but are actually running out of it. "I'm talking to you, petty officer, seaman, whatever you are. Look at me." Her hands still, just for a heartbeat. Then she sets the bolt carrier down, places the cloth beside it with the same care she gave everything else, and looks up. Gray-blue eyes calm the way still water is calm right before it isn't. "No rank to report, sir." Her voice doesn't rise to meet his. It doesn't need to. "Just here to shoot." Robinson snorts. "Just here to shoot." He turns to the others, playing to the crowd now. "You hear that? Somebody get her a spotter. Recoil on these things can knock you flat if you don't know what you're doing. Maybe we should hold her hand," another one offers. "Make sure she doesn't hurt herself. Or the Navy's reputation." Clark's hand drifts toward the radio on his belt, doesn't key it. not yet. But something's crawling up the back of his neck and he can't shake it. Harris straightens, arms crossing. You're cleared to be on this range? Yes, sir. Planning to shoot today? Yes, sir. At what distance? Something almost like amusement passes over her face and disappears before it fully forms. 800 meters, sir. The laughter that follows is immediate. Robinson actually slaps his knee. 800. Right. Okay. He looks at Harris, delighted. Sir, with respect, I'd like to see this. For educational purposes, Harris's expression doesn't change, but something shifts behind his eyes. By all means, Lieutenant. Let's see what she's got. She stands without using her hands. One clean motion, cross-legged to upright, like her body doesn't need momentum the way other bodies do. Picks up the rifle, already reassembled, checks the chamber with a glance that takes less than a second, and walks to lane 7. Clark is already moving before he's decided to move. Something old and careful in him pulling him closer. She settles at the bench, left hand under the forend, right on the grip, body squared behind the weapon like it's an extension of her spine. Makes one adjustment to the rear bag, a fraction of an inch, then goes still. Somebody get her extra ammo, Robinson calls out, leaning against the tower railing, arms crossed. She's gonna need practice rounds just to find the paper at that range. Does she even know where the safety is? Someone else says. Harris says nothing now. Just watches, hands clasped behind his back, and something in his face has gone quiet in a way that wasn't there a minute ago. Because here's the part nobody in that crowd understood yet. The joke they were telling themselves about her was about to become the only thing they'd remember about this afternoon, and not for the reason they expected. She breathes. 4 in, 4 held, 4 out. On the 4th exhale, at the exact bottom of it, when her body has nothing left to give, and nothing left to lose, her finger finds the trigger. The first shot breaks clean. The rifle barks once. Recoil rides into her shoulder and disappears there. Absorbed like it was never violent to begin with. She doesn't flinch, doesn't lift her head from the scope, just works the bolt, chambers the next round, settles, breathes, fires again. Second shot, third, fourth, fifth. 18 seconds start to finish. Clark doesn't need the spotting scope to know what happened. He looks anyway, because some part of him needs to see it confirmed before he'll let himself believe it. 5 holes. Center mass. Clustered so tight they're nearly touching. Perfect score. His hands are shaking when he lowers the scope. He has to clench them still. Check the equipment. Harris says, quiet now. All the earlier bravado drained out of his voice. Make sure the rangefinder's calibrated. It's calibrated every morning, sir. Clark answers, and there's something rough underneath the words. That's protocol. Check it anyway. A junior officer jogs the distance with a handheld unit, takes 3 readings, radios back with a voice that's lost some of its confidence. Distance confirmed. 800 meters, plus or minus half a meter. Robinson stares at the monitor screen mounted on the tower, where the automated scoring system displays the results in bright green numbers. 5 shots, 5 perfect scores. His jaw works like he's chewing on something he can't swallow. Lucky shots, he says finally, though it comes out thinner than he means it to. Wind must have been in her favor. He clears his throat, tries again with more conviction. What kind of glass are you running? Has to be something custom. She doesn't answer at first, just looks at him with those eyes that give away nothing. I asked you a question. Standard issue, she says, same as everyone else. No way. Robinson looks to Harris now, needing an ally. Sir, I want to inspect that rifle. Make sure there's nothing unauthorized on it. Do it. He crosses to lane 7, hand out. She watches him come, but doesn't stop him. He turns the rifle over, checks the mounts, the trigger group, the barrel. His face tightening with every second, he finds nothing wrong. Sets it down harder than he needs to when he's done. Fine, you can shoot. Doesn't make you a sniper. One good string doesn't mean anything. Clark can't hold it in anymore. That wasn't luck, Lieutenant. Stand down. Rangemaster, Harris says, flat final. But his eyes stay on Anna, a beat longer than the words suggest he wants them to. She's already breaking the rifle down again. By the time Harris walks over, boot heels loud on the concrete. He stops beside her, arms still crossed, studying her the way you'd study a puzzle that's started to feel like it might actually be dangerous. Where'd you train? Various locations, sir. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm authorized to give. His eyes narrow. If you're really that good, you won't mind proving it under real conditions. Official qualification, tomorrow, 0800. Different range, different distance. Time limit. If you pass, you're certified. If you fail, you're off my range for good, and everyone here is going to remember you as the woman who got lucky once. She doesn't blink. I'm not trying to impress anyone, sir. Then you won't mind proving it. Robinson grins, already imagining the story he'll get to tell tomorrow night. I'll bring a camera. For the record, the officers drift off, in a loose, murmuring cluster, already rewriting the afternoon, into something they can live with. Clark stays where he is, 20 feet back, watching Anna finish packing her case. As she passes him, she slows. Just for a second, her eyes flick to his face and something passes between them that has nothing to do with words. Rangemaster, she says. Just that. 2 words, quiet as a door closing. Then she's gone, boots kicking up small clouds that hang in the air behind her, longer than they should. Clark watches until she disappears around the equipment shed. Then he pulls his radio off his belt and switches to the encrypted channel with hands that still haven't stopped shaking. Control, this is Range. I need to flag something. Off record. Go ahead, Range. He glances around first. Habit, not necessity. That shooter who cleared 800 meters in under 20 seconds. 5 perfect hits. He swallows. I think we need to run her quietly. Because if she's who I think she is, we've got a situation. Copy that. Send her lane number and timestamp. We'll look into it. He lowers the radio and stares at the empty lane. Brass casing still glinting in the late sun. 15 years he's been doing this job. He's watched Olympic-level shooters come through. Spec Ops veterans. Marine Scout snipers with 2 decades of trigger time behind them. Not one of them has ever put a group that tight, at that range, under that kind of pressure. Not unless they came from somewhere most people never get to hear about. Because some skills you can teach. And some skills mean somebody taught you how to survive first, and the shooting came after. Back in the administrative building, Ryan Robinson sits alone in the small office he shares with 2 other lieutenants, laptop open, coffee going cold at his elbow. He's watched the range footage 4 times now. The woman, the rifle. 5 shots, 18 seconds, every one dead center. He rewinds it again and watches her work the bolt, smooth, automatic, the kind of motion that only comes from doing something 10,000 times until your hands stop needing your brain's permission. His roommate walks in, drops a gear bag on the floor with a thud that doesn't even make Robinson look up. Still watching that? Let it go, man. She got lucky. 8 years, Robinson says, not looking away from the screen. I've qualified expert marksman 3 years running. My best time at 800 meters is 32 seconds. I was proud of that. She did it in 18 and her group was tighter than mine's ever been. So she's better than you. Happens. It's not about that. He finally looks up, and there's something uneasy in his face now. Something that's stopped being about pride. It's the way she moved. The way she didn't react to any of it. Like she'd heard worse. Like whatever we said to her today was nothing compared to something else she survived. His roommate shrugs, pulling off his boots. You're spiraling. Maybe. He closes the laptop. But I'm going to check her gear again tomorrow before the test, and I'm going to find out who she is tonight. He grabs his jacket and heads for the door, taking the stairs 2 at a time down to the ground floor, where personnel records live behind a badge reader and after-hours silence. His clearance gets him in. The room is dark except for a monitor left glowing on standby. He sits, slogs in, pulls up the range access logs from the afternoon, scrolls until he finds lane 7, the timestamp. The entry is there. The name field is blank. Just a notation. Walk on. Cleared by Rangemaster. Walk-ons are supposed to show ID. That's protocol, and protocol doesn't just get skipped for no reason. He switches to the camera feed covering the sign-in desk, rewinds to the moment she arrived. There. She's handing something to the clerk. The clerk glances at it, types something, waves her through in under 30 seconds. He zooms in on her hand. Some kind of card, but the resolution's not good enough to tell what it actually is. Dead end. He sits back, frustrated, replaying Clark's face in his memory. The way the old man went quiet after the shooting. The way he stepped off alone before keying his radio, like he didn't want anyone close enough to hear. Clark knows something. Robinson is sure of it now. Sure in a way that feels less like suspicion and more like the floor tilting slightly under him. And tomorrow, before that test starts, he's going to find out what. Back in his office, Timothy Clark sits with his hands folded, staring at a phone that rang 20 minutes ago and left him different than it found him. The voice on the other end had been calm, professional. The kind of voice that doesn't waste a single word it doesn't need. Rangemaster, this is Colonel Vance, G2. We've processed your flag. The individual is cleared to be on your range. Beyond that, I can't tell you anything else. Do you understand? I need to know who she is, sir. You need to know she's cleared. That's all. Do not run her again. Do not flag her access. Do not discuss this call with anyone outside a secure channel. Are we clear, Rangemaster? Yes, sir. Good. And Clark, if she shoots tomorrow, let her shoot. Don't interfere. That's an order. The line went dead before he could ask anything else. Now he sits in the quiet, trying to make sense of it. G2 doesn't call down to a firing range. G2 doesn't tell a rangemaster to stand down and shut up, unless something well above his clearance is happening right under his feet. He's been in this job long enough to recognize the shape of a non-answer when he hears one. She's not just a talented shooter. She's something protected, something that makes colonels pick up phones. He opens his desk drawer and pulls out a spent casing he pocketed off the range without quite deciding to. Turns it over in his fingers. Standard brass, nothing special. Except the way she used it. That wasn't standard at all. He thinks about the ink he almost saw when her sleeve rode up during reassembly. Dark lines, geometric, gone before he could make sense of it. Tomorrow, when she shows up for that qualification test, something's going to happen that Admiral Harris isn't ready for, and Robinson, with his wounded pride and his need to prove something, is going to push. And when you push someone who's been trained the way she's been trained, you don't get the reaction you're expecting. You get something else entirely. He picks up his phone and scrolls to a name he hasn't dialed in 3 years. Master Sergeant Gary Young, retired 40 minutes out near Silver Bend. Young spent 20 years doing work that never made it into an after-action report. If anyone can confirm what Clark's starting to suspect, it's him. The line rings twice. Clark, this is a surprise. I need to ask you something off the record. A pause, long enough that Clark can hear his own pulse in it. Go ahead. If I described a shooter to you, female, late 20s, no rank, no unit ID, 5 perfect hits at 800 meters, under 20 seconds standard gear. What would you tell me? Another pause, longer this time. When Young speaks again, something's changed in his voice, gone flat. Careful. I'd tell you to stop asking and walk away. That's what I figured. Clark, listen. If you've got someone like that on your range, you do your job and nothing else. You don't dig, you don't speculate, and you sure as hell don't get in the way. Harris scheduled a public qualification test for tomorrow morning. He's trying to embarrass her. Young curses under his breath. Then Harris is an idiot, and you need to be ready for things to go sideways. How sideways? The kind that gets flagged all the way to the Pentagon if it goes wrong. Clark, I'm serious. If she's who I think she is, you are not dealing with an enlisted shooter trying to prove a point. You're dealing with someone who's been through the worst this world's got to offer and came back out the other side. Just be ready. That's all I'm saying. The line goes dead. Clark sets the phone down slowly, hands shaking again in a way they haven't. Since he was a much younger man standing somewhere he wasn't supposed to talk about afterward. Across the base, in a small room in temporary quarters with cinder block walls painted the exact beige the military uses. When it wants a space to mean nothing, Anna King sits at a bolted-down desk. Laptop open. Screen throwing blue light across a face that hasn't fully relaxed in longer than she can remember. She's not looking at the screen. She's looking at her own hands. Faint scar tissue across the knuckles. Calluses built up over years of trigger time. a thin white line on her left ring finger, where a piece of shrapnel once buried itself deep enough to need field surgery in a place that doesn't exist on any map handed out to the public. Every mark is a sentence in a book nobody else will ever get to read. Her sleeve is rolled up now. No reason to hide it when she's alone. The tattoo runs from mid-forearm to just below the elbow, a scope reticle. Crosshairs, the number 162 in small, clean digits. Below that, smaller text, Wraith, and a set of dates that mean nothing to anyone who doesn't already know what they cost. She traces the outline with one finger, feeling the faint raised texture where the ink sits under skin that's earned every inch of it. 162. Not all of them were bad people. Some were just standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Caught in somebody else's war they never signed up for. But they were targets. Confirmed, designated, eliminated. She did the job every single time, and she carries every single one of them whether she wants to or not. The laptop chimes. New message. No sender name. Just a string of encrypted characters that resolves into a plain block of text once she enters the key from memory. Situation developing as expected. Harris took the bait. Test scheduled for 0800. Robinson is digging. Clark knows more than he's saying. Proceed to phase 2. Reveal only when forced. Delivery confirmed for 23:30. Good luck, Captain. Captain. It's been a long time since anyone said that word to her out loud. 16 years since she stood in a kitchen doorway, watching news footage of a car fire on the local channel. 13 years old, not understanding yet that the man they were pulling from the wreckage in pieces was her father. 16 years since the investigation into Brigadier General Charles King's death got quietly filed away as mechanical failure, despite every piece of evidence pointing somewhere else entirely. She learned early that the system doesn't protect the people it's supposed to. Sometimes it protects the ones doing the hurting instead. And she learned, slower, harder, that if you want something like justice, sometimes you have to become the kind of thing the system can't afford to ignore. So she enlisted at 18. Worked her way up until someone in a room she was never told the name of noticed what she could do. Went to places where the war happens, without cameras, without oversight, without anyone back home ever hearing the names of the people who did the actual work. And every confirmed target she took, she checked against a private list, only she kept. Names connected to her father's death. 26 of them scattered across her 162. 26 people who thought enough time had passed that they'd gotten away with it. They were wrong. But the network is bigger than 26 names, bigger than she realized even a year ago. And now it's turning its attention toward Admiral Edward Harris, a man scheduled to testify in front of a closed congressional hearing about procurement fraud and intelligence leaks that reach further up the chain than most people would believe if you told them straight. Because 16 years ago, before the fire, before the funeral, before the shelved investigation, Harris and her father had been partners chasing the same corruption. An investigation that ended the night before her father was set to brief the Secretary of Defense. Somebody made sure it never got that far. A knock at the door. 3 raps, a pause, 2 more, the delivery. She crosses the room, opens the door to a gap wide enough to see a man in plain civilian clothes, mid-30s, expression carefully blank. He hands her a small case, nods once, and walks off without a single word exchanged between them. She closes the door, sets the case down, opens it. Inside, a phone already powered on, 1 contact saved, Tower 4, and a single photograph, Edward Harris leaving base housing 2 hours ago. In the background, half out of frame, a sedan with tinted windows she doesn't need a second look to recognize. Different plates this time, maybe a different year, but the same configuration, the same signature. The network likes consistency, and consistency is the only mistake they've never managed to fix. She sets the photo down and doesn't call the number yet. Not tonight. Tomorrow comes first. The reveal comes first. The moment Harris understands what he's actually dealing with comes first. She rolls her sleeve back down, covering the ink, and lies back on a bed that's too firm and too narrow, hands folded behind her head, staring at a ceiling fan turning in slow, tired circles. Sleep won't come easy. It never does the night before something starts. But she's used to functioning on almost nothing. That part of her got trained out of softness a long time ago, in a place she doesn't let herself think about unless she has to. A stretch of months overseas, where the walls were close and the questions never changed and the men asking them wore expressions that never once looked like mercy. They thought they'd broken her there. They were wrong about that, too. You can't break someone who's already decided she's already dead. You can hurt her. You can make her scream in a language she stopped speaking out loud a long time ago. But you can't take the center of who she is if she's already let go of everything around it. She survived by making herself empty, by waiting, and when they finally got careless enough to leave her alone in that room for 15 minutes, because they'd convinced themselves she was too far gone to move, she found a way out that she still doesn't talk about. Not even to the people who debriefed her afterward. The people who extracted her didn't ask questions on the ride out. They just wrapped her in a blanket and got her to a hospital and let the questions come later, from men in quiet rooms with folders they never let her read. The decision came down from somewhere far above her pay grade. Captain King was too compromised to return to active duty. Her identity was burned beyond use. For everyone's safety, including her own, she needed to disappear. So they disappeared her. New name on paper. New records nobody could trace. A quiet life that felt for a while almost like enough. 3 years of odd jobs and staying off any grid that mattered. 3 years of trying to figure out who she was when she wasn't Wraith anymore. When the number on her arm stopped growing and started just sitting there, waiting for her to decide what it meant now. Then the intel came through. The same network that killed her father was still active. Still embedded somewhere inside the military's own machinery. Still selling secrets, still sabotaging operations, still getting good people killed for a profit margin. And their next target was a man who used to be her father's partner. Which means tomorrow isn't about proving she can shoot. Tomorrow is about making sure Edward Harris lives long enough to say what he knows in front of the people who need to hear it. She closes her eyes. Breathe slow. In, hold, out. The rhythm that's carried her through firefights, through interrogation rooms, through 3 years of trying to be a person who doesn't flinch at loud noises. It'll carry her through tomorrow too, because she isn't just a shooter. She isn't just a soldier who got lucky with a rifle once on a hot afternoon, in front of people who underestimated her for sport. She's a promise made in silence a long time ago, the kind of promise that doesn't expire, just because the person who inspired it has been gone 16 years. Somewhere down the hallway, footsteps pass. Someone laughs at something. Normal sounds from a normal life she used to have. Before all of this, before the ink, before the list. Maybe when this is over there's a version of her future that isn't measured in confirmed names. Maybe. But first, tomorrow. First, the test Harris thinks is designed to embarrass her. First, the moment. He finally understands that the woman he mocked on his own firing range is the reason he might still be breathing next month. Because here's the part that should keep you up at night, the way it kept her up that night. The people who decide who gets to be believed and who gets laughed off a firing range rarely have any idea who they're actually standing in front of. The fan turns, the night deepens, and somewhere in a beige room that means nothing to anyone but her, a woman the record books call dead, finally lets herself drift toward a few hours of something close enough to rest. Tomorrow, 0800, lane 3, different distance, different conditions, same outcome. The morning comes in gray first, then gold, then that flat white desert light that doesn't forgive anybody anything. Have you ever watched someone walk toward a test they already know they're going to pass and felt the dread anyway? Because that's the qualification range at 7:58, and that's every person standing at the fence line watching for her. Word travels fast on a base this size, faster than orders, faster than fuel trucks. By dawn, half of Fort Marlowe has heard some version of yesterday's story, and the version that survived the retelling has her shooting blind, one-handed, underwater, depending on who's doing the talking. People want to see her fail today. Want the world to snap back into the shape they understood yesterday morning. The one where rank matches skill and nobody without insignia gets to be better than the men who earned theirs. Admiral Edward Harris arrives early. 4 officers with him. Robinson's one of them, clipboard tucked under his arm like a weapon of his own, regulations and scoring criteria printed out and highlighted like he's building a case in a courtroom nobody else knows exists yet. Rangemaster Timothy Clark hasn't slept. Spent the night running scenarios in his head that all end badly for somebody. Colonel Vance's order sits in his chest like a swallowed stone. Don't interfere. Fine, he won't interfere. But every instinct he's got is screaming that this morning doesn't end quiet. At 0800 exactly, Anna King walks through the gate. Same uniform, no insignia. Rifle case in one hand steady, like the weight of it means nothing. She doesn't look at the crowd, doesn't look at the whispering. Just walks, straight line, eyes on lane 3, like everything else on this range is furniture. Robinson steps into her path before she gets there. I need to inspect your equipment first. He says it like he's been waiting all night to say it. Regulations. Any personal weapon gets pre-qualification inspection. She sets the case down, flips the latches without a word. He kneels, checks the stock, the receiver, the barrel, runs his thumb along the scope mount, like he's hoping to find something loose, something wrong, something he can hold up in front of everyone and say, see, I told you. Finds nothing. Closes the case harder than it needs to be closed. Fine. You're cleared. He stands, brushing dust off his knees that isn't really there, but understands something. Today's not 800 meters. Today's 1,000. Different wind, different elevation. 3 attempts, 5 shots each. Minimum score of 45 to qualify. And this time we've got cameras on every angle, so there's nowhere for luck to hide. She picks the case back up, walks to lane 3. Doesn't answer him. Because there's nothing to answer. The range safety officer calls out the procedure. 10 minutes to prepare. Range is hot, and the crowd presses in closer, murmuring. Someone already filming on a phone they're not supposed to have out here. She settles behind the rifle, checks the scope. Adjustments so small they're barely visible from 10 feet away. Breathes. Robinson leans toward Harris, voice pitched low but not low enough. Watch. First shot's gonna drift. Classic mistake at this range. The first shot breaks clean. Center ring, 10 points. Lucky, Robinson says, wind assisted. Watch the next one. Second shot. Same rhythm, same stillness between rounds. The kind of patience that looks almost boring until you remember what it's actually made of. Center ring again. Third, fourth, fifth, 50 out of 50. First attempt. Robinson's face goes the color of the concrete under his boots. Check the rangefinder. Something's wrong with the numbers. Clark keys his radio, voice flat with something that isn't quite satisfaction but is close enough to it. All systems confirmed accurate. Range is 1,000 meters, plus or minus 0.3. Calibration verified this morning per protocol. Harris steps forward, eyes locked on the monitor, 5 holes clustered tighter than a closed fist. Something in his face has stopped being skeptical and started being afraid, though he wouldn't call it that yet, not out loud, not to himself. Because here's the thing about watching someone that good work under that kind of pressure. It stops feeling like a demonstration. It starts feeling like a warning. Attempt 2, the safety officer calls. Wait, Robinson says, hand up. Change lanes, move her to 5. Clark's voice cuts sharp over the radio. Lieutenant, that's not protocol. I'm invoking discretion. Lane 3's got wind shadow, lane 5's exposed. If she's really that good, it shouldn't matter. Harris nods once. Do it. She stands without a word of complaint. Walks to lane 5. Sets up again. Same checklist. Same stillness. While the crowd trails after her, like she's the only weather system on the range. Flags downrange snap harder now. Gusts pushing 10, maybe 12. Robinson's counting on this. Counting on the wind to be the thing that finally breaks the streak. 5 more shots. 5 more center hits. 100 out of 100 cumulative. The crowd goes quiet in a way that's different from before. Not stunned silence exactly. Something closer to reverence. The kind that makes people pull their phones higher, angle for a better shot of a moment they already sense they'll be talking about for years. Robinson's clipboard slips out of his hand and hits the dirt. Third attempt, Robinson says, and there's a crack in his voice now, something desperate underneath the words. No, Harris says, quiet. She's qualified. More than qualified. He walks closer to lane 5, arms still crossed, studying her the way you'd study a locked door you're starting to suspect you don't actually want opened. Who trained you? Various instructors, sir. That's not an answer. It's the one I'm cleared to give. His jaw tightens. I want your identification, your service record. Right now. She looks up at him, calm the way glass is calm right before it cracks. I don't think you do, sir. Not here. In front of everyone. That wasn't a request. Robinson's already moving. Before Harris finishes the sentence, closing the distance fast, reaching for her arm like grabbing it, will make her answer faster. Like force is a shortcut through a conversation he's losing badly. His fingers close around her forearm. He pulls, her sleeve rides up, and there it is. Clean lines, a scope reticle, crosshairs, the number 162. Below it, smaller, unmissable now that it's out in daylight. Wraith. Dates that don't need explaining to the handful of people on this range old enough to understand what they mean. Robinson freezes, hand still on her arm, mouth open, nothing coming out of it. Because you can prepare all you want for a moment like this. You can run scenarios in your head all night the way Clark did. And it still lands like a door blown off its hinges the second it actually happens. The crowd erupts into whispers, phones angling in, someone gasping loud enough to carry. Clark's gone pale at the console, knuckles white where he's gripping it. He suspected. He knew, in the part of himself that trusts instinct over paperwork. Seeing it confirmed is a different animal entirely. Stand down, he says into the radio, voice cracking. All personnel, stand down. Repeat, stand down. Harris stares at the ink like it might rearrange itself into something less impossible if he looks long enough. His lips move without sound at first. Then louder, the number falls out of him like something he's been carrying for 3 years without knowing it. 162. She pulls her arm free, rolls the sleeve back down. Too late. Everyone already saw it. An older man pushes through the crowd now. Moving with a purpose nobody else on this range has. Gary Young, retired, drove out from Silverbend at 4 this morning because Clark's phone call last night wouldn't let him sleep either. He stops 10 feet off, looks at the sleeve like he can still see through it, and his whole face changes. Wraith, he says. Operation in the Eastern Corridor. You pulled a command team out of a valley nobody was supposed to walk out of. 30 confirmed in under 6 minutes. Longest shot on record. They told us you died overseas 3 years ago. She stands slowly. Faces Harris. I'm Captain Anna King. Sniper operations, 3 years active in that program. 162 confirmed. And you, Admiral, are in danger. Real danger, starting now. Harris takes a step back, like the ground shifted. What are you talking about? The same network that killed my father 16 years ago is targeting you. They know you're set to testify before Congress next month. They know what evidence you're sitting on. They're planning to make sure you never say a word of it. Robinson finally finds his voice, and it comes out shaking. That's insane. She turns to him now, and something in her expression softens just slightly, not mercy exactly, more like recognition of a wound she already knows the shape of. Lieutenant, how long has your wife been getting followed? His whole body goes rigid. When did the photographs start? The ones of Carol leaving work, walking to her car alone. He's shaking now, visibly. The clipboard forgotten somewhere behind him in the dirt. How do you know her name? Because the people threatening her are the same people who left me for dead. They've been using you, Lieutenant, putting pressure on you to make sure anyone getting close to the Admiral gets discredited before they can get close enough to matter. They have Carol right now, and they're using her to make sure Harris doesn't live long enough to testify. The clipboard, he was still half holding drops the rest of the way. He's not the confident lieutenant from yesterday anymore. He's just a man realizing the floor he's been standing on was never solid to begin with. I didn't have a choice. He says it like a confession he's been holding underwater for weeks. They showed me proof. They said. If I didn't, his voice breaks apart entirely. I know, she says, quiet now, not unkind. That's why I'm here. Harris processes all of it at once. The shooting, the ink, the name, the threat, and something in his face has gone the color of old paper. If this is true, he says slowly, why hide it? Why not come to me directly? Because I needed to see who the traitor was first. I needed the network confident enough to move without being careful. And I needed you to watch me shoot before I told you what's coming, so you'd believe me fast enough to matter. Because here's the thing about trust built in an afternoon. It only works if the proof arrives loud enough to drown out every reasonable objection standing in its way. She looks at Harris steadily. 5 years ago, you were pinned down in a valley overseas and you asked over the radio who I was. I told you it didn't matter, that you just needed to stay alive. Same situation now, Admiral. You need to stay alive long enough to testify. I'm here to make sure that happens. Something crosses his face that looks almost like grief arriving late to a funeral it missed the first time around. Young steps forward, all business now, the retired soldier in him snapping fully awake. Captain, what do you need? I need Lieutenant Robinson's wife extracted. I have 43 minutes before they move her to a secondary location. After that we lose the trail. Robinson's crying now openly, no attempt to hide it, and it changes something in the crowd's posture. The mockery from yesterday, curdling fast into something closer to shame. Warehouse Southside, Industrial District. He gets the words out between breaths. I don't know the exact address. They blindfolded me when they let me see she was alive. I know where it is, Anna says. I've been watching this network for 3 months. I know their safe houses, their protocols, their people. She looks at Harris. I need your authorization to run a hostage rescue on base perimeter now. He doesn't hesitate. You have it. What else? I need Robinson with me, and I need you to stay here, surrounded by witnesses, until this is finished. They won't move on you while there's a crowd watching. She pauses. And I need Rangemaster Clark to pull perimeter footage from the last 3 months. Any vehicle entering the industrial district between 0200 and 0400. Whoever's running this is on this base. High rank. Trusted. Hiding in plain sight. Clark's already moving, radio pressed to his ear, voice steady in a way it hasn't been all morning. On it, Captain. Because that's the moment the whole range understands. This isn't a story about one woman proving she can shoot. It's the moment before something much bigger cracks open, and none of them are ready for how far the cracks are going to travel. Harris looks at Anna, really looks this time, past the uniform, past the ink, past everything the crowd around them has already decided she is. Why didn't you just tell me the moment you arrived? Because yesterday you saw a nobody, she says. Today you know I'm the reason you're still breathing. I needed that gap closed before I asked you to trust me with something this big. A pause settles between them, the kind that carries weight neither of them says out loud yet. 8 years ago, she continues, my father and you were investigating procurement fraud together. Partners. He found evidence of a network buried inside military intelligence and logistics. The night before he was set to brief the Secretary of Defense, someone put a bomb under his car. Harris's face has gone completely ashen now. I was 13, she says. I watched the wreckage on the local news before anyone told me it was him. They ruled it mechanical failure, closed the file, but I knew, even at 13 I knew. David, she stops herself, correcting silently. No, not David, Charles, her father's name catching on something raw, before she pushes past it. Charles King was my friend, Harris says, voice breaking somewhere underneath the rank. My partner. When he died I knew it wasn't mechanical. I had no proof. I had a wife, kids. I stayed quiet, told myself there was nothing I could do. I know, she says. That's why I'm here now, not for revenge. Because the same network that killed him is coming for you next. And this time I have the training and the evidence to stop it. But I need you alive to testify. I need Robinson to choose the right side. And I need 42 minutes to pull off a rescue that breaks this thing open for good. Robinson wipes his face with the back of his hand, still shaking. If you're lying, my wife dies. Harris dies, and they win. I'm not lying, Lieutenant. I'm giving you one chance to fix this. Are you coming or not? He looks at Harris. The Admiral nods once, and something in that single nod carries the weight of every mistake he's made since the fire 16 years ago. Go bring her home. The crowd parts as Anna and Robinson move through it, and Young falls in step behind them, without needing to be asked. 3 other veterans peeling off from the fence line to join, faces gone hard and focused, the reflex of men who spent careers waiting for a moment, exactly like this one. By the time they reach the parking area, it's a 6-person element loading into 2 vehicles. Because that's the funny thing about a morning that started with a joke about someone polishing rifles. It ends 40 minutes later with an armed extraction team pulling out of a military base to save a woman none of them have ever met. Because the person driving point spent 16 years turning her own grief into a weapon, precise enough to save strangers with it. Anna drives lead. Robinson beside her, hands clenched in his lap so tight his knuckles have gone white. Neither of them talks for the first block. Then he breaks the silence, voice small. Why are you doing this? After everything I said to you yesterday. Because you're not the enemy, Lieutenant. You're a man who got put somewhere impossible and made the wrong call trying to protect someone he loves. That's not the same thing as being one of them. I could have gotten her killed. You didn't. That's what matters now. He stares out the window, jaw working. What happens to me after this? That depends on what you do in the next 40 minutes. The desert blurs past outside, industrial district rising ahead in low gray shapes against a sky that's gone hard and bright with morning. Somewhere behind them, back at the range, Clark is already pulling 3 months of footage, hands steady now in a way they weren't an hour ago, because purpose does that to people, gives the shaking somewhere useful to go. Somewhere ahead, in a warehouse with 2 men smoking outside a chain-link fence, a woman named Carol Lee sits bound but unharmed, counting minutes she doesn't know are already running out for the people holding her instead of for her, because the network built its whole operation on the assumption that nobody would ever put the pieces together fast enough to matter. On the assumption that a woman they left for dead 3 years ago would stay that way, on the assumption that fear buys silence forever, instead of just until someone decides it doesn't. They assumed wrong on every count. Anna checks the rearview mirror once, gaze steady, and the desert light catches the edge of her jaw the way it might catch a blade left out too long in the sun, sharp and quiet and entirely unbothered by what's coming. Robinson watches her hands on the wheel, the same stillness she carried on the firing line, now carried into something that isn't a range anymore, isn't a test anymore, is just the truth of who she's always been underneath the missing name tape and the blank service record. 41 minutes. He finally asks the question he's been circling since the moment his fingers closed around her arm and pulled the whole morning apart. What was it like, overseas? Whatever happened to you there? She doesn't answer right away. When she does, her voice has gone somewhere flatter, somewhere further away. 8 months. A room with no windows. Questions that never changed, no matter how many times I answered them the same way. She pauses. They thought silence would break me eventually. It didn't. It just taught me how to wait. He doesn't say anything for a long moment. Then quietly, I'm sorry. For yesterday. For all of it. Save it, she says. Not unkind. Just focused. Eyes back on the road ahead. Save it for Carol. She's the one who needs to hear it more than I do. The warehouse comes into view 3 blocks out, low and gray behind chain link, 2 figures visible near the entrance, smoke curling up lazy and unhurried into a sky that has no idea what's about to happen underneath it. 38 minutes. Anna pulls the vehicle into a side street, kills the engine, and for 1 second, the whole car goes silent except for 6 people breathing and the tick of metal cooling in desert heat. Because this is the part of the story where the joke from yesterday afternoon stops being funny to anyone who ever laughed at it, where a woman nobody bothered to ask a real question about turns out to be the only reason any of them are about to walk away from what happens next in one piece. She turns to the group. Voice low, steady. All business now. Robinson, you stay with the vehicles. Engine running. When we come out with Carol, you drive. Understood? Understood. Young checks his weapon, glances at the warehouse, back at Anna. Rules of engagement? Protect the innocent. Everything else is secondary. She checks her watch. 37 minutes. We go in 3. The team splits into 2 approach angles, moving low along the fence line, boots silent on gravel that hasn't seen rain in weeks. The 2 guards outside don't see it coming until it's already happened. 2 suppressed shots, non-lethal, both men down, before either gets a hand near his weapon. Because that's the thing about a woman who's spent 3 years being told she doesn't exist anymore. She stopped needing permission to be dangerous a long time before this morning ever started. The door gives to a picked lock instead of a breach, silence doing more work than force ever could. Inside, 3 men sit around a card table, and behind them, in a corner, still bound but visibly unhurt, sits Carol Lee, head lifting the second the door opens, eyes wide with something between terror and disbelief. The 3 men don't get a full second to react. The element moves through the room like something poured, rather than walked. Fast, controlled, overwhelming, and within 15 seconds, all 3 are flex-cuffed on the floor. Anna crosses straight to Carol, crouches, cuts the restraints with 2 clean motions. Carol, I need you to breathe for me. You're safe now. Can you stand? Carol's crying too hard to answer at first, just nodding, hands shaking as Anna helps her up, because somewhere behind a locked office door at the back of this warehouse, the person who set this whole thing in motion is sitting completely still, listening to the sound of a rescue she never planned for, and the next 4 minutes are about to answer a question nobody on this base has thought to ask yet. Who inside Fort Marlowe has been feeding this network everything it needed all along? Anna hands Carol off to one of the veterans, motions for the man to get her outside to the vehicles, and turns toward the back office alone, rifle up, breath steady. 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, the same rhythm that carried her through a range full of people laughing at her less than 24 hours ago. She reaches for the door handle, and somewhere on the other side of it, a voice she almost recognizes says quiet, unbothered, like she's been expected the whole time. I wondered when you'd figure it out, Captain. The door swings open on a woman who doesn't look surprised at all. Deborah White. 52 years old, gray hair pulled back tight enough to mean business, uniform pressed like she planned on being photographed today. Colonel, Deputy Commander of Fort Marlowe, the kind of officer whose name gets used as an example in leadership briefings, sitting behind a metal desk in the back office of a warehouse full of men who just got flex-cuffed by a rescue team. Like this is simply where her Tuesday happened to land her. Have you ever looked at someone you were trained to trust completely and felt the floor drop out from under everything that word used to mean? Anna doesn't lower the rifle. Stand up. Hands where I can see them. White stands, unhurried, hands rising to shoulder height, with the calm of someone who's rehearsed this moment in her head more than once. You know this doesn't end anything. She says it almost gently. I'm one node, Captain. The network's bigger than you realize, maybe. But you're the node that killed my father. Something flickers behind White's eyes, not guilt, closer to irritation, the look of someone corrected on a minor point of fact. You're the node that let me get sold overseas. You're the node that ends today. White's mouth curves, thin and cold. You think I'm afraid of prison? No. I think you're afraid of being forgotten, of dying in a cell while the rest of the network moves on without you, like you were never anything more than a name on a memo. Anna steps closer, rifle steady. Testify, and you're the one who brought it down. Your name in the record, the whistleblower. Refuse, and you're just another corrupt officer who got caught with her hand in the drawer. For a second, just a second, something shifts in White's face, calculation dressed up as fear. On your knees, Anna says, quiet now, hands behind your head. White hesitates, then kneels, slow, deliberate, like even surrender is something she intends to control the terms of. Gary Young moves in fast, cuffs clicking shut, and outside the office, The sound of the warehouse has changed completely. Boots on concrete, radios crackling, the particular controlled chaos of a scene getting handed over to people whose job it is to clean things up. Because that's the moment everyone standing in that warehouse understands the story isn't over. It's just changed shape. Outside, in the gray morning light, Robinson watches his wife emerge from the building, and something in him breaks open completely. He drops to his knees before she even reaches him, arms wrapping around her legs like a man afraid gravity itself might take her back if he doesn't hold on hard enough. "I'm sorry," he says into the fabric of her jacket, over and over, the words coming apart before he can finish them. "I'm so sorry. I should have told someone. I should have." Carol's hands find his hair, his shoulders, pulling him up until they're both standing, both shaking. "You saved us," she whispers. "That's what matters now." By the time Admiral Harris arrives with a convoy of military police and a helicopter cutting slow circles overhead, the whole base has gone into lockdown. Gates sealed, radios buzzing with a version of the truth that's still catching up to what actually happened. Harris crosses to White directly, face hard in a way none of his officers have seen it before. "Why?" White says nothing. "Why kill Charles King? Why target me? Why betray every oath you ever swore to protect?" For a long moment, White just watches him. And when she finally speaks, her voice carries no apology in it at all. "Because the system's broken, Edward. Because the people at the top get rich while the people at the bottom bleed for it. Somebody has to profit from the chaos. It might as well be us." Harris's voice drops low. "Us. You said us." White smiles, says nothing else. Anna steps forward, rifle finally lowered, voice flat. She'll talk. They always do. Once the alternative is watching their whole empire collapse from inside a cell. Because here's a truth. Nobody teaches you in briefings about loyalty. The people who talk the loudest about broken systems are usually the ones who broke it first, and then blame the wreckage on everyone else. Military police load White into one vehicle, load the 3 men from the card table into another. Medical personnel move in to check Carol, murmuring reassurance, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, even though the morning's already warm enough that she doesn't need it, the gesture more about comfort than temperature. Robinson approaches Anna slowly, and something in his walk has changed since yesterday. Some of the swagger burned clean out of it. He stops a few feet away, doesn't quite know what to do with his hands. "I don't know how to thank you," he says, "for any of it. You don't have to. You made the right call when it mattered. That's enough." He shakes his head. "It's not enough. Not after what I put you through yesterday. In front of everyone." She studies him for a moment, something almost gentle in it. "You were scared for someone you love. That's not the same as being cruel. Don't confuse the two, Lieutenant. You'll spend your whole career punishing yourself for the wrong crime if you do. Because forgiveness, when it actually arrives, rarely sounds like the speeches people imagine giving each other. It sounds like this: small, practical, enough to move forward on, and nothing more than that." Harris finds Anna near the vehicles as the scene winds down. MPs finishing their sweep, the helicopter finally breaking off toward the base to refuel. He stops in front of her, and for a moment neither of them says anything at all. Then, slowly, deliberately, he comes to attention, salutes. "Captain King, on behalf of the Navy, on behalf of every person you've protected without them ever knowing your name, thank you." She returns the salute. "Just doing the job, sir." "No," his voice roughens. "You did far more than the job. You carried something no one should have to carry alone for 16 years. He drops the salute. "And I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't have the courage to keep pushing after your father died. Sorry I let the silence win for this long. Sorry it took you coming back from the dead to remind me what honor's actually supposed to look like. You're testifying now," she says quietly. "That's what matters. Only because you gave me the chance to." A pause stretches between them, heavy with everything neither one has said yet. "What happens now?" he asks. "Now the evidence goes to Congress. White's network unravels from the inside, one confession at a time." She glances toward the horizon, sun climbing fully over the ridgeline now. My father's death finally means something instead of just being a line item somebody buried 16 years ago. And you? What happens to Captain Anna King? I testify. Then I disappear again. Wraith was always meant to be temporary. You've earned recognition. A promotion. More than that. I don't want recognition, sir. I want my father's killers answering for it. I want this network broken all the way down to the roots. She starts to turn. Anna. She stops. Your father told me something the night before he died. He said if anything ever happened to him, I should tell you that you don't have to be a soldier your whole life. That you're allowed to just be his daughter. That it's enough. Her eyes close for a moment. When they open again, they're wet in a way she doesn't bother hiding. Thank you for carrying that. For 16 years. Because some sentences take a decade and a half to travel the distance between two people. And land exactly as heavy as the day they were spoken. The base spends the rest of that day working through the fallout in pieces. Clark hands over 3 months of gate footage to investigators, his hands finally steady, his voice finding its old certainty again now that the waiting is over. Somewhere in that footage, timestamps line up with vehicles nobody thought to question before, proof that White's late-night movements weren't the anomaly everyone assumed they were. Just a pattern nobody had the reason to look for until now. By evening, the base rumor mill has fully caught up with the truth, and something in the way people move through the hallways has shifted, quieter, more careful. The particular hush that settles over a place after it survives something it didn't see coming. That night, Anna sits alone on the steps outside temporary quarters, sleeves rolled down, boots untied, watching the last color drain out of the sky over the mountains. Young finds her there, 2 coffees in hand, sits down without asking permission. Rough day, he says. Understatement dressed up as small talk. She almost smiles. Rough 16 years, he hands her a cup. You did what he'd have wanted. I don't know what he'd have wanted. I was 13. I only ever knew him as somebody who made pancakes on Saturdays and got quiet whenever the news came on. Young's quiet for a moment. That's still knowing somebody, Captain. Maybe the most honest way there is, because grief doesn't care how much classified training you've had. It finds the same soft places in everyone. No matter how many confirmed names sit tattooed on your arm. 3 days pass before the congressional subpoenas go out. And in that gap, the base holds its breath the way places do after something enormous happens and everyone's still waiting to see what shape the aftermath takes. Harris spends most of it in closed briefings, walking the halls, with the posture of a man carrying something heavier than rank, heavier than command, the weight of finally saying out loud what he's kept quiet for 16 years. Robinson requests a formal meeting with Anna before she leaves for the hearing prep facility, and when she agrees, he shows up with Carol beside him, both of them looking steadier than they did in the warehouse doorway. We wanted to say it properly. Robinson starts, voice careful. Not just in the middle of everything falling apart. Carol reaches out, takes Anna's hand in both of hers. You didn't just save me, you gave him a way back to himself. She glances at her husband, something soft and unbreakable passing between them. That's not something either of us is going to forget. Anna nods, doesn't trust her voice for a second. Then, quieter than she means to say it, take care of each other. That's the whole job, really. Everything else is just noise around it. Because sometimes the truest advice a person can give comes out smaller than the moment deserves, and lands bigger anyway. The hearing takes place in Washington 3 weeks later, in a room with too much fluorescent light and not enough air, cameras banked along the back wall, senators leaning into microphones like, the questions matter more than the answers. Harris testifies for 6 hours. Names surface that nobody outside a narrow circle of investigators expected to hear. Procurement contracts inflated, intelligence sold sideways, a decade of quiet theft dressed up as bureaucratic inefficiency until someone finally had the evidence to call it what it actually was. Anna testifies too, though most of what she says stays sealed behind classificationals the public will never see. What does make it into the record is enough. A pattern of names connecting White's network directly to the car bombing that killed Brigadier General Charles King 16 years earlier. A paper trail nobody had been able to build until a woman the record books called dead spent 3 years quietly building it herself off any grid that mattered, on nothing but patience, and a promise she never let herself forget, because justice, when it finally arrives, rarely looks like the version people imagine watching from the outside. It looks like exhaustion, like paperwork, like a woman sitting very still in a wooden chair, answering questions in a voice that doesn't shake even once. Because she's already lived through every worst thing that room could possibly throw at her. Deborah White pleads out, rather than face a full trial, the evidence against her too complete to survive a courtroom fight. 35 years, no possibility of early release. 3 other officers connected to her network receive sentences between 18 and 28 years. A dozen more careers end quietly. Resignations dressed up as retirements. The machinery of institutional embarrassment working exactly the way it always does when the story gets too big to hide and too small to fully punish. Harris announces his own retirement 6 months after the hearing. Full honors, a ceremony on the same base where all of this started. He stands at a podium in front of rows of officers and speaks for exactly as long as he needs to and not 1 minute longer, about honor, about the cost of silence, about a woman who reminded him what both words actually mean when you strip away the speeches usually built around them. Robinson stays in the Navy. Starts an informal mentoring program for junior officers, the kind of quiet initiative nobody puts on a recruiting poster, but everyone who goes through it remembers for the rest of their career. He never talks about the warehouse, unless someone asks him directly, and when they do, he tells the truth without flinching, because he learned the hard way that the version of himself worth being isn't the one who never makes mistakes. It's the one who fixes them when it counts. Anna officially separates from service 4 months after the hearing, declines the Medal of Honor when it's offered quietly, without ceremony, in a private meeting with a 2-star Admiral, who doesn't push back once she explains her reasoning. Give it to someone still fighting, she says. I'm not that person anymore. I don't need a ribbon to prove what already happened. She accepts the promotion to major instead, a quieter form of recognition, something that lives in a file rather than a display case, and that feels closer to right than anything with a ceremony attached to it. She buys a small house outside a town in New Mexico, small enough that nobody asks questions they don't already know the answer to. Quiet street. Good light in the mornings. A porch that faces east, because after everything, she's decided she wants to watch things arrive, instead of always watching for what's coming to take something away. Have you ever wondered how many people around you are carrying a story you'll never get to hear, simply because nobody bothered to ask, or nobody had the patience to wait for the answer? 3 months into her new life, an envelope arrives. No return address. Hand-delivered, based on the absence of postage, left directly in her mailbox sometime between her morning coffee and the moment she checked it in the afternoon. Inside, a single photograph, a military installation she doesn't immediately recognize. A figure circled faintly in the background, features too small to identify without magnification. A note, 4 words long. Tower 4 sends regards. She stares at it for a long time on the porch, coffee going cold beside her, the same way Robinson's did that first night in his office. Though she doesn't know that detail and wouldn't care if she did, one name remains. She doesn't say it out loud, doesn't need to. The knowledge sits in her chest, the way it always has. Patient, unhurried, willing to wait as long as it needs to. She places the photograph in a drawer, not forgotten, just deferred, the way everything in her life has always eventually gotten handled, on her own timeline, at her own pace, when the moment finally calls for it, instead of before, because justice isn't loud, it's patient. And Anna King has been patient for 16 years already. She can manage a little longer. The rifle case still sits in her closet, cleaned, maintained, ready, just in case a day arrives that asks something more of her than coffee and quiet mornings. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of the world runs on people who look ordinary right up until the moment they're not? How often the person everyone's underestimating in the room is the only reason the rest of the room gets to walk out of it in one piece? Gary Young visits most weeks now, usually with coffee, occasionally with something stronger, depending on how the conversation's shaping up to go. They sit on the porch most afternoons and talk about nothing important: the weather, the neighbor's dog, whatever's on the radio. Two people who spent decades doing work most people never hear about, finally learning what it feels like to just exist without an objective attached to it. "What's next, Captain?" he asks one evening, watching the sun drop toward the mountains in that particular slow desert way that makes every evening it feel like it's being savored on purpose. She considers the question longer than it probably deserves. "I don't know yet." "You miss it?" "The work? Every single day." She says it plainly, no shame in it, but missing something and needing to go back to it aren't the same thing. "I think I finally understand the difference." He laughs, low and warm. "Then maybe it's time we both find something new to do. Something that doesn't involve people shooting at us." "Sounds boring." "Sounds perfect," he says. And for once she doesn't argue the point, because after everything, after the range and the humiliation, that turned out to be the opening move in something far bigger, after the warehouse and the tattoo and the 16 years of grief, carried quietly under a uniform, nobody bothered to read the whole story of. Maybe boring is exactly what earns its place at the end of a story like this one. Robinson sends a letter that winter, handwritten, no return address requested, just a simple update. Carol's doing well. The mentoring program's grown past what he expected. He signed 3 new officers into it last month, all of them carrying weight they haven't figured out how to name yet, and he tells them, when the moment feels right, about a range in the desert and a woman he almost broke by underestimating her, and how the difference between the person he was that morning and the person he became by evening wasn't talent or training. It was choosing to listen, once the truth finally arrived loud enough to hear. He ends the letter with a line that stays with her longer than she expects it to. "You taught me that the loudest people in the room are usually the ones with the least worth hearing, and the quiet ones are the ones actually worth being afraid of underestimating." She folds the letter carefully and puts it in the same drawer as the photograph. 2 different kinds of unfinished business sitting side by side, waiting for whatever comes next. Harris calls occasionally too, mostly just to check in, his voice steadier now than it was in that warehouse doorway, lighter in a way that suggests retirement, suits him better than 30 years of rank ever quite managed to. He mentions, once, almost offhand, that he started a scholarship fund in her father's name, quietly, no press release, just a line item, buried in a university's financial aid office. That'll outlive both of them, without anyone needing to make a speech about it. He'd have liked that, Anna says when Harris tells her. Quiet, no fuss, just useful. Sounds like his daughter, Harris says, and there's warmth in it that wasn't there in their first conversation. Back when he was a man, giving orders to someone he thought he could still afford to underestimate. Because that's the real shape this story ends up taking, underneath all the twists and the gunfire and the hearing room lights. Not a story about revenge finally collected after 16 patient years. A story about people learning, late and imperfectly, that the ones who look like they have the least to say are often the only ones in the room who actually understand what's at stake. On a clear morning in early spring, Anna stands on her porch with coffee in hand, watching the sun come up gold over the eastern ridge the way it does most mornings now. No camera, no crowd, no test waiting for her at the far end of it. Just light, arriving slow and certain the way it always does. The way it did on that first afternoon at Fort Marlow, when nobody watching her clean a rifle in the shade had any idea what they were actually looking at. She thinks about her father, sometimes in mornings like this. Less about the fire now, more about the pancakes, the quiet, the version of him that existed before the world decided he knew too much for his own safety. She thinks the promise she made at 13 has finally been paid down as far as it can go for now, and that whatever's left of it can wait in a drawer beside a photograph and a letter until the day it decides to matter again. For now, she's just Anna, daughter, veteran, survivor of things most people will never have to survive. But if Tower 4 calls again, if the last name on that circled photograph ever steps far enough into the light to matter, if the mission ever asks one more thing of the woman who used to answer to a call sign built out of grief and precision, well, some habits don't retire just because the person carrying them decides to try. She doesn't miss. Not at 1,000 meters. Not ever. Have you ever had to forgive someone before you were sure they deserved it? Just because holding on to the anger cost more than letting it go, it makes you wonder how many of us judge people too fast. Close a door on someone's whole story before we've heard even the first page of it. And call that certainty instead of what it actually is. If this story moved you even a little, tell us in the comments what part hit hardest, and whether you've ever been the person everyone underestimated right up until the moment it mattered most. The letter arrives on a Tuesday, which feels wrong somehow. Tuesdays are for grocery runs, and the crossword, and nothing else. Not for the kind of paper that changes the shape of a person's week. Have you ever had a quiet life just long enough to convince yourself it was permanent, only to have it interrupted by a single envelope? It comes through the regular mail this time. Not hand-delivered, not slipped into her box in the dead of some unmarked hour. Just a plain white envelope with a New Mexico postmark and no return address, sitting on top of a water bill and a flyer for a hardware store that's been closing forever without ever actually closing. Anna King almost doesn't open it right away, almost lets it sit on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker for a day. The way she's let the other ones sit in a drawer for months now, unopened business she's learned to live beside, instead of resolve. But something about the handwriting on the front stops her. Careful. Deliberate. The kind of penmanship taught to people who used to write things down that mattered, back before everything went digital and traceable and dangerous to keep on paper at all. Inside, a single sheet. No greeting. Just 4 lines typed. The last name has a face now. He's testifying next month, in a different courtroom, on a different case, and he doesn't know what's coming. Neither does the person assigned to protect him. You're the only one who can close this the right way. Below it, an address, a date 3 weeks out, and, at the very bottom, in smaller print, like an afterthought, that isn't really an afterthought at all, the words Tower 4 is retiring. This is the last message you'll get from this line. She sets the letter down on the counter beside the coffee maker, and stares at it for a long time, the kind of stillness that used to mean something very specific in a former life. 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, except there's no rifle in front of her now, just a kitchen table, and a view of mountains going gold at the edges with morning. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about finishing something. Sometimes it isn't finished. Sometimes it's just paused, waiting politely in a drawer for the day you're ready to pick it back up. And that day arrives whether you're ready for it or not. She calls Gary Young before she calls anyone else, because that's become the order of things now, has been since the desert, since the coffee on the porch steps and the conversations about nothing that turned out to be about everything. He picks up on the second ring, and something in his voice tells her he already knows this isn't a social call before she says a single word about why she's calling. "You got something," he says. Not a question. No return address. Tower 4 again. A pause on the line, the particular silence of a man doing math he doesn't like the answer to. Thought the channel went dark after the hearing. So did I. What's it say? She reads it to him slow, word for word, and when she finishes, there's another long pause, longer this time, the kind that means he's already 3 steps ahead of the conversation, and deciding how much of it he wants to say out loud over an unsecured line. "You going?" he asks finally. "I don't know yet." "You know," he says, gentle but not soft. "You've known since you opened the envelope. You're just giving yourself permission to pretend otherwise for a minute." because that's the particular cruelty of people who know you well enough to see straight through the careful nothing you're performing for their benefit, and love you enough to call it out instead of letting you keep performing it. She doesn't answer right away. Out the window, the sun's fully up now, the porch railing, throwing a long thin shadow across the yard, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog is barking at something that isn't there, the way it does most mornings. A small ordinary sound from a small ordinary life she's spent the better part of a year building on purpose. If I go, she says finally, it's the last time. I mean that. You said that about the hearing too. The hearing wasn't a choice. This is. Young's quiet for a second, then careful, not unkind. Is it though? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like the same promise you made when you were 13 years old, just wearing different clothes this time around. She doesn't have an answer for that, doesn't try to build one, just lets the silence sit there on the line between them until he finally sighs, the sound of a man who's argued this exact point with himself plenty of times and lost every single time. I'll drive up tomorrow, he says. Bring the coffee. We'll figure out what this actually is before you decide anything. That night she doesn't sleep well, which hasn't happened in months. Not since the last of the paperwork from the hearing finally cleared, and the reporters finally stopped calling, and the town finally stopped whispering every time she walked into the grocery store. She lies in the dark staring at a ceiling that isn't the ceiling fan from Fort Marlowe anymore. Just plain drywall in a house she picked because it faced east, because she wanted mornings instead of nights for once in her life. She thinks about her father. Not the fire this time, the kitchen, the pancakes. The way he used to hum something tuneless while he cooked, off key, in a way that used to embarrass her at 13 and that she'd give almost anything to hear again now. She thinks about the drawer, the photograph, the letter from Robinson folded up beside it, 2 pieces of unfinished business that have sat quiet for months, patient the way she taught herself to be patient, except patience was always supposed to have an end point, and maybe this is it. Maybe this is what patience was actually for. Gary Young shows up the next morning, true to his word, 2 coffees in hand, and they sit on the porch, the way they always do, except this time, there's a folder between them instead of easy silence. A folder Young's clearly spent half the night putting together, based on a handful of calls to people who still owe him, favors from a career that officially ended years before hers did. Full name's Nathaniel Cross, he says, sliding a photograph across the small table between their chairs. No relation to your family, before you ask, just an unfortunate coincidence with the surname. 41 years old, former defense contractor turned whistleblower. He's set to testify in a federal case in 3 weeks about procurement fraud that traces back through 3 different administrations. Different case than Harris's, different network on paper, but the money trail runs through some of the same shell companies White's people used, because that's the part that makes her stomach go cold in a way the letter alone didn't manage. Different case, same architecture. Which means the thing they thought they broke wasn't broken at all, just wounded. And wounded things have a way of coming back angrier than before. Who's protecting him now, she asks. U.S. Marshals detail. Standard witness protection. Young taps the photograph. Standard protocols for a case this size against a network this patient, which is exactly the problem. She studies the photograph longer than she needs to. Nathaniel Cross has a tired face. The kind of tired that comes from knowing something dangerous and carrying it around for longer than any person should have to carry something like that alone. Not a soldier's face. Not trained for any of this. Just a man who saw something wrong and decided against every reasonable instinct to say so out loud anyway. He's not like Harris, she says quietly. Harris had 30 years of training underneath the fear. This man's got nothing. Which is exactly why they think they can get to him before the trial starts. Because here's the arithmetic that decides everything from this point forward. A trained man surrounded by a crowd is hard to kill quietly. An untrained man surrounded by 4 marshals who've never faced anything like what's actually coming for him is a soft target dressed up as a hard one. and soft targets are the ones that end up in the news for the wrong reasons. She sets the photograph down. Where is he now? Safe house. Rural Colorado near the Wyoming border. Isolated on purpose, except isolated cuts both ways when the people hunting you have more patience than the people protecting you. Young watches her face while she processes it, and something in his own expression has gone careful in a way she recognizes. The particular caution of a man who already knows what she's going to say before she says it, and isn't sure he agrees with the decision, but isn't going to be the one to stop her from making it either. I'm going, she says. I figured. I need it to be quiet. No hearing, no headlines, no Medal of Honor conversation at the end of it. This isn't about recognition. It's about making sure the last piece of White's network doesn't get to finish what she started before I walked into that warehouse. Young nods slowly. Then you're going to need help getting there without raising flags. And you're going to need somebody who still has contacts in the Marshal Service, who actually listen instead of laughing you out of the building. Do you have that? I have one guy, he says. Owes me from a long time ago. Might still be sore about it, though, because favors, in a world like the one she used to live in, are rarely free, even when they're technically already paid for, and the currency that actually matters isn't money or rank but trust, the kind built slowly over years and spent carefully, one call at a time, when the situation genuinely warrants it. The contact turns out to be a woman named Sharon Ramirez, Deputy U.S. Marshal with 15 years in and a reputation, according to Young, for being the only person in her regional office who's ever actually read the full file on a protective detail before showing up to run it. She agrees to meet them 2 days later at a diner off the interstate outside Denver. The kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that's been sitting on the burner too long, chosen deliberately because nobody who matters would ever think to look for anyone important in a place like this. Ramirez slides into the booth across from them without preamble, sharp eyes moving over Anna's face, like she's already cataloging something she hasn't decided how to feel about yet. Gary tells me your former special operations. Says you helped break up the White network last year. Anna doesn't correct the wording, doesn't explain the parts that stay classified. Just nods once. And you think my detail's compromised? I think your detail is standard. I think the people coming for Nathaniel Cross are not. Ramirez's jaw tightens. My people are good. I'm not saying they're not good. I'm saying they've never faced anything like this before, and the first time you face something like this is usually the time you don't walk away from it clean. The silence that follows carries weight. Ramirez turning a coffee mug slowly on the table without drinking from it, working through something in her head that Anna recognizes from the inside. The particular resistance of a professional being told her professionalism might not be enough this time. What do you need? Ramirez asks finally. Access to the safe house, perimeter details, communication protocols, and I need your people to understand I'm not there to take over their job. I'm there because if this goes the way I think it's going to go, you're going to need someone who's already seen this exact playbook run once before. Because that's the sentence that finally lands. The one that shifts something behind Ramirez's eyes from skepticism into something closer to grim agreement. The recognition of a professional who'd rather swallow her pride than bury someone under her protection. Because she refused good information out of stubbornness. Fine, Ramirez says. But you work through me. Nobody outside this booth hears your name in connection with any of this. Understood? Understood. They spend the next hour going over maps, timelines, the layout of a rural property outside a town, small enough that the diner they're sitting in currently has more people in it than the town does on a Tuesday afternoon. Anna asks questions with the particular precision of someone building a mental model of terrain she hasn't seen yet, filling in gaps with instinct honed over years of doing exactly this kind of work. And Ramirez, despite herself, starts answering faster, more openly, the reluctance in her posture softening incrementally with every question that turns out to matter. By the time they leave the diner, something's shifted between the three of them, not quite trust yet. but the early architecture of it, the kind that gets built fast under pressure, because there isn't time to build it any other way. They arrive at the safe house 2 days before the estimated threat window. Anna's built based on the pattern. White's network, always followed. Strike close enough to the trial, date that replacing the witness becomes logistically impossible, but early enough that the target hasn't tightened his own security in anticipation. The property sits at the end of a long gravel road, ringed by pine trees, thick enough to provide cover in every direction, which sounds defensible until you understand that cover cuts both ways, and a network patient enough to wait 16 years. For the right moment, doesn't mind waiting a few extra days in a tree line if it means getting the approach right. Nathaniel Cross meets them on the porch when they arrive, and up close, he looks even more tired than the photograph suggested. Dark circles under his eyes, hands that don't quite stay still, even when he's trying to keep them steady. He's polite in the particular over-careful way of someone who's spent months being handled by professionals and has learned not to ask too many questions about the people handling him. "You're the one Sharon told me about," he says, extending a hand that trembles slightly when Anna shakes it. "I'm here to help make sure you get to that courtroom," she says. "That's all you need to know for now." He nods, swallows hard. They already tried once, 2 weeks ago. A car followed me from the grocery store for almost 10 miles before it turned off. Marshal Ramirez said it was probably nothing. It probably wasn't nothing. His face goes a shade paler, I figured, because that's the particular horror of being the target of something you can't quite name or prove. The slow accumulation of small wrong details that everyone around you keeps insisting don't add up to anything, until the day they finally do. And it's too late to have insisted otherwise. She spends the first night walking the perimeter alone, memorizing angles, sight lines, the places a patient shooter would choose if patience were the plan instead of speed. The property backs onto a ridge that gives clear visibility down into the yard from almost 400 meters out, close enough for a trained shooter to work with, far enough that nobody watching the tree line with the naked eye would think to worry about it. She flags it to Ramirez the next morning over coffee on the porch, the two of them speaking low, even though the nearest neighbor is well over a mile away. "That ridge is the play," Anna says. "If I were running this, that's where I'd set up. Clean sight line, easy egress into the Forest Service road on the other side, minimal exposure the whole way in and out." Ramirez studies the terrain through binoculars for a long moment, jaw tight. "My people have been watching the tree line at ground level. Nobody thought to check elevation that far back. Because that's the gap between good training and the kind of training built specifically to exploit good training's blind spots. Ground-level security assumes a threat that thinks in ground-level terms. It doesn't account for someone who spent years learning to turn distance itself into the weapon. They spend the rest of that day quietly repositioning, without alerting Cross, to just how precisely the threat has been mapped, because a scared witness makes mistakes a calm one doesn't, and calm, right now, is worth more than full transparency. Ramirez pulls 2 marshals off routine ground patrol and repositions them with a spotting scope trained on the ridge itself, while Anna sets up a position of her own further back in the tree line, invisible from the ridge, invisible from the house, watching the one angle nobody else on this detail would have thought to watch. Night falls slow and cold, the particular stillness of high-altitude Colorado in early spring, breath fogging even through a jacket, stars arriving in numbers you don't get back in New Mexico's flatter light. Anna settles into position with the patience of someone who's done this exact kind of waiting more times than she'd ever want to count out loud, breath slow, mind quiet in the specific way that used to unsettle people who watched her do it, calm laid over something colder underneath. Because here's what nobody who's never done this kind of work understands about waiting. It isn't empty time. It's the loudest part of the whole operation. Every second stretched thin with everything that could go wrong. Held together by nothing but discipline and the refusal to let your body believe the stillness is safety, instead of just quiet. Midnight passes without incident. 1 in the morning. 2. At 2:40, a faint sound crosses the ridge that doesn't belong there. A boot placed too carefully to be an animal, too deliberately quiet to be anything, except a person trying very hard not to be heard. Anna's breath goes flat, and even 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 4 counts out, the rifle already settled into position, before conscious thought catches up to instinct. Through the scope, a shape resolves slowly out of the dark. One figure, moving low along the ridgeline, exactly where she predicted, rifle slung across the back, in a way that speaks to training, but not quite enough training, the small tell of someone good but not great, someone who learned the shape of the job without ever quite mastering the patience underneath it. She keys the radio low, voice barely above a whisper. Contact, ridgeline, single shooter, moving toward overwatch position. Hold ground positions. Do not move on the house. Ramirez's voice comes back just as quiet, tight with adrenaline. Copy standing by. The figure on the ridge settles into position roughly where Anna predicted, 400 meters out, and begins the slow, deliberate process of setting up a rifle rest, unaware entirely that he's being watched from a position he never accounted for, because nobody accounts for the possibility that the person hunting them might already be behind them instead of in front, because this is the part of the job that never gets easier, no matter how many times you've done it, the moment right before everything changes, when a single decision separates a story that ends in a courtroom from a story that ends in a headline nobody wants written. She doesn't fire first, waits until the shooter's fully committed to position, weapon shouldered, focus entirely forward on the house below, the exact moment his own patience becomes the thing that makes him vulnerable. Federal agents, she says, voice carrying clean and flat across the dark, close enough now to be heard without a radio. Lower your weapon. The shooter freezes, doesn't lower anything, starts to turn instead, and turning is the wrong choice. The choice that ends this the hard way, instead of the easy way, except Anna's already accounted for both outcomes, and has her own weapon trained precisely enough that the outcomes was never really in doubt to begin with. 1 shot, non-lethal round to the shoulder, precise enough to end the threat, without ending the life attached to it, because this isn't about revenge tonight. This is about a witness who deserves to make it to a courtroom, and a network that needs someone left alive to interrogate. The shooter goes down hard, weapon clattering off the ridge, and within 90 seconds Ramirez and 2 marshals are on the ridgeline, cuffing a man who's groaning through gritted teeth, more furious than afraid, the particular anger of someone who spent weeks planning something that ended in less than 5 minutes once it actually started, because that's always the gap between the planning and the doing, the fantasy of control the network sells its people versus the reality that control evaporates. The second, someone better prepared is already waiting on the other side of the equation. They get him talking within the hour, back at the local field office, the kind of talking that happens fast. Once someone realizes the network they've been protecting has no intention of protecting them back, now that the job's failed. His name is Timothy Clark, no relation to the rangemaster, a detail that makes Anna's stomach turn slightly when she first hears it, an unfortunate coincidence of a common name attached to a much darker context. Former private security contractor, recruited 8 months earlier by a handler he only ever knew by a first name, paid in installments, through an account that traces, eventually, exactly where everyone in that room expected it to trace, back to what's left of White's operation. A handful of names below her in the hierarchy, never fully exposed during the original hearing, because the investigation ran out of time and political will before it reached the bottom of the structure. People who kept operating quietly in the 18 months since, assuming the network's collapse at the top meant safety for everyone still hiding underneath it. They assumed wrong. Ramirez calls it in immediately. Federal agents fanning out within days to 3 different states, based on the account trail, and within 2 weeks 4 more arrests follow, the kind of quiet unglamorous police work that never makes headlines the way the original hearing did, but matters just as much, maybe more, because it closes the actual gaps the first round of arrests left open. Nathaniel Cross testifies exactly on schedule. 3 weeks later, in a federal courthouse 2 states away from the safe house that nearly wasn't safe enough. Anna doesn't attend, doesn't need to, watches the outcome on the news from her own kitchen table instead. Coffee going cold the way it always seems to when something important is happening on a screen instead of in front of her, and feels something settle in her chest that she doesn't have an easy word for. Not triumph exactly, closer to relief. The particular relief of a debt finally fully paid, with nothing left owing on either side of the ledger, because that's the part the letter didn't quite manage to say out loud, the part Tower 4's final message left folded up inside the smaller print about retiring. This was never really about Nathaniel Cross at all. It was about closing the last door White's network left cracked open, the last piece of unfinished business standing between Anna and the version of her own life she's been trying, imperfectly, to build for the better part of a year now. Gary Young calls that evening, and for once neither of them says much of anything important. Just talk about the weather, about a fishing trip he's been threatening to take for months, about nothing at all that matters, and everything that does, because that's what a life after all of this is actually supposed to sound like. You did it, he says finally, near the end of the call. Whatever this was, it's done now. I think it might actually be, she says, and means it in a way she hasn't quite managed to mean anything like it in a long time. 2 weeks later, a package arrives at her door. No return address, though by now she's stopped expecting one. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwriting she doesn't recognize this time. Different from the earlier letters. Someone new entirely. Someone whose job it apparently was to close out whatever Tower 4 left unfinished. Thank you for finishing what wasn't yours to finish. This channel is now permanently closed. Whatever comes next in your life, it won't come from us again. No name attached, no further instructions, just an ending, plain and unceremonious, exactly the way real endings tend to arrive, without the fanfare fiction usually gives them. She reads it twice, then a third time, standing in her kitchen with the morning light coming in gold across the counter, and something in her chest finally exhales all the way, a breath she's apparently been holding in pieces for longer than 16 years, longer than she ever let herself fully admit, even to Gary Young on quiet porch evenings. She walks to the drawer where the first photograph still sits, pulls it out, sets it beside this new letter, side by side, one closed loop next to another. Then she does something she hasn't done in the better part of a year. She picks up the phone and calls Edward Harris directly. No urgency in it, no crisis attached, just the simple, ordinary act of checking in on someone who's become, against every reasonable expectation, either of them had at the start of this, something close to family. He answers on the third ring, voice warm in the particular way retirement seems to have settled into him. Captain, this is a surprise. It's finished, she says. All of it, the whole thing, every loose end. A long pause on the line. The sound of a man absorbing news he's been waiting a long time to hear without quite believing it would ever actually arrive. All of it. All of it. His voice, when it comes back, carries something unmistakably close to tears in it, though neither of them will ever say so out loud. Your father would be proud of you. I hope you know that. Not for the fighting. For knowing when it was finally time to stop. She doesn't answer right away. Throat tight, sun climbing higher over the mountains outside her window, the same mountains she picked this house specifically to watch every single morning, for exactly this reason, to have something patient and unchanging, to look at while everything else in her life kept moving. I think I do know that now, she says finally. It took a while to get here. Most important things do, he says, gentle. Doesn't mean you were wrong to take the long way. They talk a while longer, about nothing important, the way conversations between people who've earned real ease with each other tend to drift, and when she finally hangs up the phone The house feels different somehow. Lighter, the particular quiet of a space that isn't waiting for anything anymore. That evening, Gary Young shows up unannounced with 2 coffees and a fishing rod he's clearly bought specifically for this occasion, standing at her door with the kind of grin that makes her laugh before he's said a single word. "You're serious about this fishing trip," she says. "Dead serious. Found a spot up near the Chama River. No cell signal, no warehouse, no congressional hearings. Just water and bad coffee and the 2 of us pretending we know what we're doing with a rod and reel. Sounds terrible. Sounds perfect," he says, echoing something he's said before, something that's become a kind of quiet joke between them over the months. The 2 of them slowly discovering what an ordinary life actually feels like from the inside after decades of neither one of them getting the chance to find out. She takes the second rod from his hands, feels the unfamiliar weight of it, foreign in a way a rifle never was, and something about that unfamiliarity feels like exactly the right kind of strange to be building a future out of, because maybe that's the actual ending this story was always working toward. Underneath the ridgelines and the hearing rooms and the 16 years of grief carried quietly under different names. Not the last confirmed target. Not the final closed case. Just 2 people standing on a porch at the edge of evening, holding fishing rods neither of them fully knows how to use, choosing, deliberately, for the first time, in longer than either wants to admit, to walk towards something ordinary, instead of away from something dangerous. If you've ever spent so long fighting for something that you forgot to notice when the fight was finally over, tell us in the comments how you found your way back to an ordinary life afterward, and whether peace, when it finally arrived, looked anything like you expected it to. The mountains hold their color a long time that evening, gold sliding slowly into purple, the particular unhurried patience of a sky that has nowhere else to be. Anna King stands on her porch beside a man who's become the closest thing she has left to family, rifle case still sitting untouched in the closet behind her, drawer full of closed letters, gathering quiet dust on the dresser, and for the first time in 16 years, watches the sun go down, without counting anything at all. Not distance, not targets, not names still owed a debt, just light, arriving and leaving the way it always has, indifferent to everything she's carried, patient enough to keep coming back tomorrow, whether she's ready for it or not. And for the first time, in longer than she can remember, she finds herself entirely, quietly, ready.